Hello everyone, welcome to my channel and welcome to another flower drawing session. Today I'm showing you how to draw some beautiful petunias. As always, all the materials I've used will be linked down below in the description box. So to start, I'm using my TWSBI fountain pen with a fine nib. This is my pen of choice for sketching flowers. I'm starting off with the biggest flower of my composition and I'm placing it front and center. Every other element I'll be adding serves the sole purpose of complementing this one large flower. I'm starting off with the outline of the flower. If you've seen petunias like these before, the common petunias, then you know they tend to have somewhat large petals that fuse together to form a funnel-like structure. And they also have significant little curls and curves all around the edge of those petals. So I'm starting with those elements for this flower and for all the other flowers that follow as well. As I draw the outline, I'm also making little quick marks here and there all along the edge as indicators of where I'm going to want to draw the longer veins of the flowers. Once I've completed the outline, I move on to the center of the flower, which will form the cup of the funnel structure that defines what is essentially the look of a petunia, right? So to achieve that, I draw downward curves only near the bottom center of the outline. These downward strokes will show us which direction the flower is facing. In this case, it's facing up, and since I've placed these strokes angled to the right, this then shows us that the flower is tilted to the left. Once the center is complete, I then elongate some of those marks I made earlier along the edge of the petals, again to show where the larger veins are located. I then decided to draw the bottom portion of this flower in order to know where not to place another flower, if that makes sense. I had a specific vision in mind, so I pretty much needed to finish off this main flower and its major components before I could feel comfortable with drawing the other flowers. The uppermost flower that I'm drawing now, I decided to make only partially open for visual interest. It's not fully open, but it's also no longer just a bud either. It's got pretty little curves that will help add beauty to the composition. Think of all the different ways that flowers show themselves to us, so we want to represent that a bit in our drawing. Again, I'm adding the larger veins of the petals. Next, I'm drawing the first of what will end up being two flower buds. Again, I'm starting with the outline. I want to show that these buds have already started to open, so I'm drawing the uppermost area of the petals by adding little curves again. But since these buds are mostly sideways, I want to also make sure that the petals closest to us are narrower than the others. This will show that those petals are sideways. Once the top of the flower is complete, I then have a better idea of how wide to make the top of the funnel and how narrow to make the bottom of the funnel. If those elements are not in proportion to one another, then the flower will not look good. I then add the veins, and I'm repeating the same steps I just explained for the second bud here. Now that both of my buds are complete, I now know where to add their stems. I simply move my hand above the paper just to see where the imaginary line is that connects the bottom of the buds to their stems, and I draw them from there. As I draw the stems, I'm also making sure to make a mark where I want to add leaves. Having these blank spaces will look better as we then connect them to our leaves rather than just adding the lines of the stems as solid lines and then adding leaves coming out of those solid lines. It wouldn't look nice. Finally, we're down to the last flower. This one is also a fully open flower, but since I'm placing it partially behind the main center flower, I want to make sure I give it the illusion of depth. I achieve that by making the petals face upwards and by having them be slightly sideways. The easiest way to show this is by adding just two little lines that represent the funnel of the flower. Those two little lines show us that this flower is behind the main flower, and they also show us the bottom of those petals, thus achieving depth. The rest of the outline, as you saw for yourselves, I drew in the same manner I drew the first flower. Then I add the larger veins as well as a little bit of very fine hairline shading right in the center. I'm adding more of that hairline shading to the other flowers. And I'm adding some hairline shading to the funnels as well once I'm done with the center of the flowers. Then I add shading to the leaves by adding hairline strokes only to the bottom of the leaves. There's no need to do anything more elaborate than that, since petunias tend to have pretty simple leaves. I'm looking over the entire composition to see if anything is missing, if I need to add anything anywhere. I'm darkening up a few areas here and there that looked like they needed it. And I'm done. Oh no, there I go again. I'm adding a few more veins here and there. I'm looking around and around. And finally, I just force myself to stop, otherwise I'll keep going and potentially mess up the whole thing. Sometimes you just have to force yourself to stop. Now for some color, I'm grabbing my size 6 Escoda travel brush. To the right, I have my Paul Rubens watercolor set of 24, and I'm grabbing a color called Madder Red, which is very pink. I'm watering it down significantly, guys, and I'm placing that very watery color all along the veins of the petals that I drew earlier. I'm then taking some clean water and brushing it along the edges of the color to soften up those edges. I'm only using the tip of my brush. Using the same brush, I'm now grabbing a color called Violet, but in the Paul Rubens set, this color is more of a warm violet, so it's got a reddish tint to it. If you don't have a warm violet, grab whatever bluish violet you have, which is a cold violet, and just add some pink or red to it to warm it up. So I'm adding that color to the center of the flowers and extending it out partially to create a veiny effect. I'm then deepening the intensity of that color by adding just a little bit of black to it. I usually never use black, but if I do use it, it's precisely in this manner, by using it as a mix instead of just the pure pigment. Straight up black is too harsh, but mixed in with something else, it works very well. I'm adding it right on top of the regular violet, but without completely hiding that initial wash of color. We want to be able to see our changes in values. So I've switched now to a less thirsty brush. It's a Princeton Heritage round brush in size 2, and I've grabbed a little bit of that darker violet that I mixed in order to emphasize a little more the larger veins of the flower, as well as to add smaller veins that I want to show coming out from the center. I'm switching brushes again. This one is an Escoda round in size 0. With this brush, I'm going back to my watered down pink color. Again, it's called Madder Red, and I'm adding all the little tiny veins that petunias tend to have, the super tiny ones in between the larger ones. I'm depicting these little veins with nothing but little light squiggles. It's quick and effective. I'm now switching to my Escoda travel brush in size 2. This one is a more thirsty size 2. I'm grabbing some regular violet and painting the base of the funnel, which is going to be a bit in shadow because of the flower right above it. Right below that violet, I'm adding a color called True Green, which is really more of a sap green. So if you have a sap green, just use that. And I'm letting the colors mix right on the paper. I'm using the darker violet and black mixture from earlier to add some shading right under the flower. I'm back to my Princeton size 2 brush, and I'm using that darker violet mix to darken up the center of the flower some more. And I'm darkening up the longer veins some more while I'm at it. Everything I just did for the first flower, I'm repeating for the second flower, starting with my very watered down madder red and softening the edges with a bit of clean water. Then I'm adding some of that regular violet to the center. That violet ended up spreading out further than I wanted it to, so I picked up that color with a clean, dry tissue. As long as the color is still wet, you should still be able to lift it with a dry brush or soak it up with a dry tissue. Once it's dry, it becomes more difficult to remove, especially when working on cellulose paper like I am here. I then reapplied the violet, less watery, to the areas where I wanted the color to stay. I then grabbed the darker violet mixture and added that to the center and to the veins. I then darkened the color some more by adding a bit more black and went over the same area again just to make it darker. Don't be afraid to use those darker values, guys. It's these darker shades that are going to give your painted sketch more depth and make the flowers look more natural. And I added that darker color to the main flower just to make the flowers more similar. And again, I'm using my size 0 brush to add those little squiggles for veins, just very lightly. I'm holding my brush high up and very lightly. Now I'm working on what is essentially the underside of the flower's petals. I'm applying that very light wash of madder red and gradually darkening it up, the bottom area, with a very watered down version of that violet and black mixture. And I'm using a less thirsty brush so that the area doesn't become too wet and lose that little bit of shading I'm trying to achieve there. Now I'm just repeating everything that I've just explained for the last 3 flowers. So I'm just going to stop talking and let you enjoy the video for a bit. And I'm back now to explain these funnels to you. I'm using some of that true green color mixed in with just a little bit of violet to create a more muted tone of sap green, and I'm placing that color wet on dry over the entirety of the funnel. I'm then taking some of that darker violet and black mixture and I'm adding it to only one side of the funnel as well as right under the flower petals, letting the colors mix on their own on the paper, wet on wet. But I'm lifting some of that violet color so that it won't spread too far, and I'm adding a bit more of the green mixture. I ended up doing that a few times before I was satisfied with it. Then I did the same exact thing to the second funnel. Once both funnels were completely dry, I grabbed some of the violet and black mixture and added veins to all the funnels, essentially just following the ink lines I drew earlier. For the stems, I used the true green color. Again, you can use just a regular sap green, and I filled in the entire stem, and I added a bit of hooker's green while it was still wet. I'm doing the same thing to the leaf, but adding the hooker's green only to the bottom area of the leaves and where the veins would be. I'm giving this same exact treatment to all of the stems and leaves. I've now pulled out my permanent white gouache from Winsor & Newton, and with my size 0 brush, slightly wet, I'm grabbing the white directly from the tube in order to get it more saturated. I'm then dabbing little random dots right in the center of all the flowers. The reason I'm using the gouache instead of my usual white paint marker is that I wanted my little dots to look less precise. My size 0 brush doesn't hold moisture well, it's not supposed to, and so by using it with gouache, my little dots are going to all look different from each other and they're going to look more organic. With the same brush, I'm now grabbing some of the watered down madder red and dabbing it randomly over some of the white dots I just created. And I'm doing the same thing again using cadmium yellow. Using these two colors will help tone down the white and make it look more natural. And I'm done. I always leave the writing for last, just out of sheer habit, but I'm now thinking I ought to write things down earlier in the process, maybe because my hand was so shaky by the time I got to this part, I almost wasn't able to write anything. The scientific name is made up of 2 words separated by an X, and I wrote the words too close to one another, so it ends up looking like one word. If you're following along with me, don't write it like that. Write it neater, more separate. And after signing it, I'm 100% done. And here's the close-up coming up. I hope you enjoyed it, guys. As always, thank you so much for being here and for watching. Don't forget to put a like on it if you enjoyed the video, and please consider subscribing if you have not already done so. I wish you all lots of happy creating, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!